Welcome back to Talking X's and O's with Alex and Tyler. We have a ton of things going on this week. Obviously, last week in the NFL was a very exciting week with the NFL trade deadline happening. So there's, quite a few blockbuster trades going on there. Quite a few things with the NBA, the MLB, NFL, everything going on in the world right now. We're just taking a look at, last week's games with some upsets. Obviously, to start off with a Thursday night football game, the Jets beat the Texans 21-13. And, Texans, they started off kind of slow. I mean, both teams kind of started off slow, but the Texans just really couldn't get anything going the rest of the game. Eventually, the Jets started to pick up, find his playmaker with Devontae Adams and Garrett Wilson. Texans, on the other hand, just like I said, couldn't get anything going. Obviously, they're down Nico Collins and Stephon Diggs, their top two receivers. So there's a Tank Dell, Dalton Schultz kind of matchup there. But yeah, Jets are easily able to defeat the Texans 21-13 there. Anything that surprised you on that Halloween football game?
It was really interesting. Obviously, the Jets were favored going into that game, but the Texans have been performing really well throughout the season, and the Jets not so much. So it was really interesting to see that they were favored. I think that, Aaron Rodgers played a great game connecting with, his offensive targets, Garrett Wilson, Alan Lazard, and then now Devontae Adams. So they played a great game. It was a little bit concerning on the Texans side just because, when you look at the Jets record, they're 3-6. And when you look at the Texans, they're 6-3. So it was a little bit concerning on the defensive side when it comes to the Texans. But, every now and then a team will choke.
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring up, how the Jets haven't been performing. Obviously, we've seen some crazy trades going on with, Devontae Adams, and later on, I mean, we'll talk about some of the trades with some of their players going into the trade deadline. But you look at this team, and maybe the Jets should have won by a bigger score. Obviously, Malachi Corey had pulled a Deshaun Watson when he fumbled the ball at the 1 yard or half yard line, I should say, and it went for a touchback and gave the Texans the ball back. But you look at the game and you think like, can the Texans rebound with the team that they have currently? Obviously, Nico Collins is still on IR. Stephon Diggs is out for the season with the ACL tear. So, are the Texans going to be able to get anything going? Where the Jets, on the other hand, like this is maybe a time where they can bounce back and hopefully, maybe try to fight with the playoff spot. The Jets do have one of the easiest schedules in the NFL. Obviously, the Chiefs is going to be their hardest matchup with the Niners up next, but it does look like a very, good matchup for them. So I mean, like you have an easy schedule. You have the Colts, Seattle, Miami, Jaguars, Rams, Bills again, and then you face the end of the season with the Dolphins. And the schedule is not that hard for the Jets. It's very possible for them to, win out. I think some of their toughest games is going to be obviously the Bills, who are their division rival, who's the number one in their division currently. But I think another tough matchup, obviously, the Rams with Puka and Cooper Cup being back. But I think the Cardinals might actually be a sleeper team for the Jets to maybe have, a tougher time to face with um having chances of the playoff diminish. So we'll talk more about that going into week 10 of the NFL season. Up next, I think this was a huge shocker for a lot of people. The Panthers actually upset the Saints 23-22.
Yeah, that one was very surprising as well. Obviously the Saints started off the season dominating and then, everything just fell apart and then Derek Carr went out with an injury and then obviously he's back now. So while he was back, I thought that they would be able to get it done against the Panthers, but they just weren't able to. And the Saints have a few players out on their offensive side, so maybe it was a lack of, chemistry or something like that. But, the Panthers just came ready to play and they were able to take home the win.
Yeah, and here's something interesting. The Saints, with the loss to the Panthers, are actually last place in their division. The Saints have won their first two games of the season against the Panthers and the Jets in or in blowout fashion, I should say. And they have not won a single game since then. And you mentioned, Chris Olave going out with a concussion. They don't have Rashid Shaheed, who's been on IR, but like it's kind of sad to watch the Saints team that started off so strong just completely fall apart. And for them to be last place after losing to, the Panthers who were in last place in the NFL, I mean, it's pretty sad to see that happen. And right now, I mean, the Saints are currently tied for I think 10 other teams with a 2-7 record. And it really just it's kind of sad just with how the team's been developing so far. And obviously, with the loss, the Saints have fired their head coach, Dennis Allen. And you look at a rebuild for this team, and it really just doesn't look likely. I mean, the Saints have the worst salary cap in the NFL. I think they're at like minus 90 million or something like that. But you have all these players who are old, they're veteran players, they're on expiring contracts, whatever the case may be. They did have one trade at the trade deadline. We'll talk about that later, like I mentioned with the Jets. But you just look at this team and you wonder like what else can you do for this Saints team to rebound and direct your season in the correct direction, or do you just tank at this point and hopefully pick up some good players to franchise around them?
Moving on, the Rams Seahawks. Obviously, the Rams took down the Seahawks 26-20. That one was an interesting one because it was an NFC West division rivalry game. I think a lot of people, expected the Seahawks to win that one, but they just weren't able to get it done. So that one was interesting. Obviously the Rams have not had the greatest time this season, except they have won 4 games. Uh, and then also they got back Cooper Kupp and Puka Nakua.
And you bring up you bring up Puka Nakua. He actually got ejected in this game, and I wasn't tuning into the game because I was watching the Cardinals Bears game, but he actually got ejected for throwing a punch at a Seattle Seahawks player, which was interesting. And with him out for the rest of the game, I mean that hurts the Rams offense, but obviously you still have Cooper Kupp there, and he still has a major impact for the Rams. And with the emergence of Demarcus Robinson playing, as well as he has. I mean, he has 4 touchdowns in the last 2 games, which is just unreal numbers. But for him to step up in the absence of Puka Nakua and help lead this Rams team to a victory in overtime against Seattle, I mean, it's a big deal. And Seattle obviously was without DK Metcalf, and you see Jackson Smith and Jigba step up, and he had himself a really, really good game. I mean, you look at the stats, he easily could have had over 200 yards if it wasn't for, holding penalties and stuff like that. But 180 yards, 7 catches for 2 touchdowns. Tyler Lockett, 3 catches, 63 yards with a touchdown. I mean, it was definitely a very competitive game from start to finish. Obviously, to start off, the Seahawks were up, 13-3 at halftime, and then to go out and throw a game-tying pick six at the goal line to, tie the game for the Rams. It really was something just to watch this team, how both teams are trying to fight for a playoff spot. And obviously, this was a big game for both teams as a loss would send them back to last place in the NFC West. Obviously, for Seattle, it meant more because you win, you're tied with the Cardinals at the number 1 spot in the NFC West. You lose, you to fall to last. I think the Rams, you go further, you go 2 games back with the loss, but with the win, you tie at second place with the 49ers, who had their bye week last week. And now we sit at this weird place where, the Cardinals have one of the easiest schedules coming up. Seattle is dead last in the division at 4-5. The Rams and San Francisco have a 4-4 record. So it's interesting to see what could happen in upcoming weeks with the NFC West.
Yeah, for sure. That's going to be something that people need to keep their eyes on, especially because, obviously the 49ers and Cardinals are tied right now. And, well, actually, I think maybe the Cardinals might have passed them since the Niners were on a bye. Actually, yes, that is correct. So the Cardinals are leading the division, but the race is really close for all the teams in it right now, and especially with Christian McCaffrey going to be making his way back onto the team in the near future. But Moving on, we are going to talk about our week 10 predictions. Starting off with Thursday night, we have the Cincinnati Bengals taking on the Baltimore Ravens. Obviously, the Bengals have picked things up recently um, with Chase Brown in the backfield after Zach Moss injured himself, and he was placed on the injured reserve on Tuesday and will likely be out for the rest of the season. So that's an interesting one. Obviously, Moss missed the team's most recent game when they took on the Las Vegas Raiders. He has a neck injury. And so, with that injury, it might slow things down a little bit. But at the same time, I don't know, because Chase Brown has been doing pretty well in the backfield. And, the Ravens obviously have Derrick Henry. So, this one's going to be an interesting one, but it's hard to go against Lamar Jackson. I'm going to take the Ravens. The game is in Baltimore as well. So I'm rolling with the Ravens on this one.
Yeah, you look at the Bengals record of teams they've beaten. Obviously you lose to the Patriots week 1, you lose to the Chiefs week 2 by a point. You lose to the Commanders week 3, and they start off 0-3 to start the season, but they've won 4 of their last 6 games, or the 4 of their last 6 games. And I mean, the teams that they've beaten, they really aren't that good. I mean, you beat the Panthers, you lose to the Ravens in overtime, crazy fashion. You beat the Giants in a very low scoring game. You beat the Browns, who are absolutely dysfunctional team. You lose to the Eagles by 20 points, which I mean, yeah, and then you go and destroy the Raiders by 17 points. So it really looks like, this team really doesn't have it together. I mean, granted, the teams they've beaten are, teams that are in worse positions, but really like the only games that they had close, obviously the Chiefs and the Ravens, which were both, one possession games. So I wouldn't be surprised if, Joe Burrow came out against this Ravens team and, played like he did last time. But I think one of the big questions is his receiver is going to be healthy? Obviously, Jamar Chase is playing great, but T. Higgins, is questionable. Charlie Jones is questionable. Starting offensive tackle Orlando Brown is questionable. So there's a lot of injury on that team. Obviously, Lamar Jackson, there was a little bit of a scare going into this week with Lamar Jackson. He didn't practice to begin this week. And, there was question on if he would play or not, but he ended up playing. And playing well. I think, with his injury, I think it's still questionable, but he still should play against this Bengals team. I think if T. Higgins doesn't play, I think, it'll be in the Ravens' favor to win by a large margin. I think if he does, I think it'll be a closer game, but, you know, this Ravens team definitely has a lot of offensive power. Obviously last week they traded for Deontay Johnson, and they still have Zay Flowers, they still have uh Derrick Henry, who's been making his presence absolutely felt. You know, Lamar Jackson leads the NFL with passing yards. Derrick Henry leads the NFL in rushing yards. Rashad Bateman's been playing great. Mark Andrews been picking up production. Justice Hill, backup running back's been playing great as well. Nelson Aguilar, he's been doing his thing, but yeah, I mean, I don't think the Ravens are going to lose this game against the Bengals.
Yeah, it would really surprise me if they did. Obviously the Ravens have just been playing a great season. But moving on, the New York Giants going to be taking on the Carolina Panthers on Sunday. It's an early one, 7:30 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. This is going to be an interesting one because obviously the Panthers upset the Saints last week, with the final score of 23-22. And then the New York Giants, they've only won 2 games this season, but then at the same time, they have an offense that produces. Their defense is just having a little bit of issues, but then they do have Thibodeau who has been playing a great season. Tyrone Tracy Jr. I believe he will be playing this weekend. And then obviously Daniel Jones has just, been connecting with his receivers. It was interesting because, he found the end zone for the first time in over 600 days this last week in New York. So, with that being said, I'm going to go with I think I have to go with New York on this one. I'm going to trust in Daniel Jones, which I know a lot of people don't ever say that, but I'm going to say it, and I really do think that the Giants will be able to take away a win. It's a little scary though, so I hope that they don't embarrass me. I wouldn't be surprised if the Panthers won, but I do think that this game will be very close.
I think the Giants defense is what's gonna keep them in this game. Obviously, their offense, it's been very lackluster. But we have seen the emergence of Tyrone Tracy Jr. We have seen the emergence of, Malik Neighbors and just how those two rookies have been such a huge impact for this Giants offense and allowing, Daniel Jones to get some time with throwing the ball and stuff like that. But, just those two players making an impact obviously is not going to be enough. And we've seen that time and time again. But, this Panthers team, still a little bit of a dysfunctional. I mean, they, trade away some of their players who we'll talk about later. Obviously, Deontay Johnson being one of the big ones that we saw last week. But like I said, uh, Byron Young will or not Byron, Bryce Young will start this week against the Giants, who the Giants have the NFL leading team in sacks, which is unbelievable. Just watching how the team performs defensively, it really is something interesting to watch. But obviously, their offense can't get it together. I mean, they did have a close one last week against the Commanders, 22-27 score there for the Commanders. But I think, this week the Giants will pull off a win. Um, I do think, like you said, it'll be a close matchup throughout the entire game. I think one of the big things for the Panthers is going to be their running game. And the reason I say that is because this Giants offense works so much around the passing game and getting him back yardage. But with Chuba Hubbard playing and, with the activation of Jonathan Brooks and, Miles Sanders and all of them, I think there could be some production in the backfield for some big running games and stuff like that. And, obviously, Bryce Young can run the ball, and we've seen that time and time again. But I think when it gets to those obvious passing downs, I think that's where the Panthers will be in trouble. Obviously, Xavier Legette is the number one receiver for the Panthers right now, rookie receiver, first round draft pick for the Panthers this year. Um, I don't know how the matchup's going to be with him and the secondary for the Giants, but I do know Bryce Young doesn't do very well with the pressure. And with the Giants' defensive line as good as it is pass rushing, I don't think that there's going to be much success passing wise. I think a lot of it's going to come from the run game, and then they're going to make some, schemes revolving around running the ball, doing some reverse plays, whatever the case may be. But I do think the Giants will win this game.
Moving on, the New England Patriots going to be taking on the Chicago Bears. This one's going to be interesting. Obviously, since the Patriots have not been playing well. They've been back and forth with quarterbacks Drake May and Jacoby Brissett, and then obviously the Bears. Just making their way through the season with a few rookies. They got Caleb Williams, and, obviously they have DJ Moore, who he's not a rookie, but, it's going to be interesting to see how they navigate uh, through the rest of the season. But, for this one, I'm going to go with the Bears. They just lost to the Cardinals, and Caleb Williams put up a terrible performance. I think it's time to redeem himself and show what he can do. Everybody saw what he can do in college when he played for USC. So I think he's going to prove himself, especially since the game will be in Chicago. And also, I don't think the Patriots are that great.
Obviously, Drake Mays has been playing really well so far in his rookie season. Obviously, he went out the Jets game with a concussion, but he's been playing great. I mean, he's a good runner. He's a good pocket passer. Some dumb passes to end the game like we did last week against the Titans to throw up a double coverage pass in overtime. But I mean, it's all rookie experience, it's all growing pains. I do think Drake Mays will be a good quarterback for the Patriots and this team in the future. But obviously, right now, I mean, you're in a spot where you just want to pick draft picks. You're not in a spot to go for the playoffs. I mean, it would be amazing if you were with the team that you have right now, but just where the team's at right now, you're not anywhere close to focus on the playoffs. I think you're just more focused on trying to have a successful season with the team you have. And, we saw 2 weeks ago them upset the Jets 22-25, and that was, huge because we've seen, Drake Mays come out and play great, but, I think with the team being at right now, I don't think they stand a chance against the Bears, which I mean, granted, we saw the Bears play the Cardinals last week, but they're down, a couple key players. And I think if those key players come back against the Patriots, I think it'll be, a different outcome. And, Montez Sweat obviously was a huge factor that didn't play last week against the Cardinals. They're down their second and third string offensive tackle. They're down, their second corner. I think their third safety or something like that. But you know, I think, if everyone comes back healthy this week against the Patriots, I think the Bears matchup will be a lot more in the Bears' favor. Obviously, Caleb Williams didn't do well against the Cardinals. Um, so there's going to be some interesting things with the Patriots defense and how Caleb Williams performs. But we did see, Roma Dunze have himself a pretty good game. He actually is second in the team for receiving yards behind DJ Moore. And, Keenan Allen, he's, a veteran of reliability, but he hasn't been really picking up his pace for what he needs. Obviously, the top three receivers, obviously, are going to be DJ Moore, Cole Kmet, and Roma Dunze. And with the secondary the Patriots have, and the defensive front that the Patriots have, I don't think they stand a chance against Caleb Williams. But I could be wrong. We saw how they produced last week against the Cardinals, who had the worst third down defense in the NFL right now. So I would say the Bears could win this game, but obviously, it's going to be up in the air depending on what players come back. But I'm going to stick with the Bears.
Yeah, I think that the Bears will take this one, but moving on, the Buffalo Bills taking on the Indianapolis Colts. This is pretty much a no-brainer. I'm gonna roll with the Bills. They have a great defense, and then also it's hard to go against Josh Allen. He proves himself pretty much every week. And they just have a great offense. And if it's not a top performer on the offensive side, it doesn't matter. He'll find a way to make it work. Obviously Dalton Kincaid has been, just having a great season with the Bills, and they just got Amari Cooper, but he was not able to play last week. So it's going to be interesting. And then on the Colts side, obviously Anthony Richardson is not going to be starting. He was a first round pick last season, and then he just kind of asked for a break, and now they're led by Joe Flacco. And Joe Flacco, I think he really doesn't get enough credit, but he really is a decent quarterback. And then obviously, they haven't played that well this season either, but I think that they do have some potential. They have Michael Pittman Jr. So, it's going to be an interesting one, but it's hard to go against the Bills. So I'm going to roll with the Bills. I think the Bills division will be interesting, and I think the Bills, I think that they're gonna win their division.
Yeah, I'm also going to roll with the Buffalo Bills. I mean, obviously, you hit it straight on with Joe Flacco. He, is a veteran quarterback. Obviously, he didn't play super well last week against the Vikings, but again, it is the Vikings defense. They are one of the number one teams defensively in the NFL. But to go from the Vikings to the Bills, I mean, that's a tough matchup to a tough matchup. The Bills defense has been playing great with all the defensive players they've had so far. Obviously, Greg Russo, has been making a name for himself as a pass rusher on that Bills team. Damar Hamlin definitely has been making a name for himself ever since, being on the practice squad last year and now getting a chance to prove himself. Um, but you mentioned, Michael Pittman being the number one receiver. I think, with Michael Pittman, I think it gives, teams look at there. But with the emergence of Josh Downs, I mean, he's been playing really phenomenal since he came back from his injury week 1 and 2. And for him to come back and, have the chemistry with Joe Flacco that he does, I think, there's gonna be some, decisions to be made on how the team's gonna play. Is it gonna be playing, more run heavy? Is it gonna be more, quick pass heavy, whatever the case may be. But with Josh Allen, like you said, I mean, he's done things all season long. He's only thrown 2 picks so far, and both of them I would say shouldn't even be his fault because they both went through the receiver's hands. But it is what it is. I mean, Josh Allen, I think, should be the front runner for MVP with his stats and where the team is right now. But you know, it's the Colts. Obviously, they still are, in a little bit of question of their future of, how are we going to deal with this with Anthony Richardson when he comes back to play next year, if he comes back to play next year, or if it's later on in the season, depending on how Joe Flacco does. Because they're not out of the playoff race entirely. I mean, 4-5 record. Sure, it might be a little tough in the AFC, but it's still very doable, especially with the division with the Texans, who are sitting at 5-4 right now. But it or 6-2 right now, 6-3, my mistake. But it it really is, one of those teams where you have to play your best ball against this team to have a shot, and any minor mistake will cost you the game. So I'm gonna stick with the Bills this game.
Yeah, and then moving on, the Minnesota Vikings is going to be taking on the Jacksonville Jaguars. Obviously this one will be interesting, but I'm going to take the Vikings. I think their defense is just too good for Trevor Lawrence, and obviously the Jags have not been playing well. They've only won 2 games this season, and when you look at their progression throughout the years, it doesn't look so good. Just a few seasons ago. Um, they were near the postseason if they didn't make it. I can't quite remember. I think they were eliminated in the first round, but obviously things haven't gone right over there in Jacksonville lately. And then when you look at the Vikings, obviously Sam Darnold has just been leading his team with Justin Jefferson. And, obviously that wasn't expected. And, it just kind of turned out to be, everything that they needed it to be. And, it's very interesting. It's going to be interesting to see what happens when, JJ McCarthy heals up and is ready to come back. And it's going to be interesting to see if the Vikings keep Sam Darnold in the circle or if they're going to transition JJ McCarthy into, the quarterback position. Obviously, he was drafted in the first round, and he did a great job over there at Michigan, led them to a national championship. But when it comes to this game, I have to go with the Vikings just because, they have the defense, they have the offense, and, I just can't see them losing to the Jags.
Yeah, and with how the Vikings defense has been playing, like you said, Trevor Lawrence has been playing great. I mean, Etienne definitely has not been playing great. You're down Christian Kirk, your number one receiver, but you get Evan Ingram back. The team just isn't performing the way it should have been performing. I think, going back to last season where they started off with a pretty good record and you kind of just fell apart halfway through the season. But this Vikings team is definitely a tough team, especially in the NFL. I mean, you have, Justin Jefferson, you have Aaron Jones, you have, all these big players on the Vikings to make uh impacts wherever they need to, where I just don't think the Jaguars have you know, that position of whatever it is to take to win a game. I mean, obviously, uh, Ryan Thomas has been playing great as a rookie for the team. I think right now he's like the number one receiver or number two behind Gabe Davis, depending on how you look at the depth chart. But I mean, with the Vikings defense, I mean, they've had turnovers almost every single game. And for them to play against a team that has been very lackluster offensively, I wouldn't be shocked to see, the Vikings completely blow out or even shut out the Jaguars this week. And, with Sam Darnold playing as great as he is, you know, with the defense playing as great as it is with Brian Flores' scheme. I just don't think the Jaguars have a chance against this Vikings team. So I'm gonna go with the Vikings, and I'm gonna say like I said, I think they blow them out, if not shut them out this game.
Yeah, and you make a good point by saying that. I wouldn't really be surprised either, just because the Jags have not been able to really put up any points. if you look at their history this season. But, you know, moving on, there's obviously going to be a rivalry game taking place. It's going to be the Broncos against the Kansas City Chiefs. You know, this one will be interesting. Obviously, Kansas City's still undefeated. They are 8-0, and you know, last week for them was a little bit scary. It went into overtime when they played against Tampa Bay, and you know, for a second there, I was getting a little concerned for the Chiefs. And you know, this one will be interesting because you know, Bo Nix obviously playing in his first NFL season and has just put up some incredible numbers and just leading his team. You know, the Broncos 5-4 right now, and you know, obviously being led by Patrick Mahomes, and you know, having some connections like DeAndre Hopkins, Travis Kelce, and then obviously they have you know Kareem Hunt in the backfield. You know, it's just an incredible team, but it doesn't stop there. When you look at the defense, they have Chris Jones, and you know they have a few great players on the defensive side. Um, but, you know, I think that this is really going to come down to coaching and experience. And, you know, the game is going to be in Kansas City. So for that reason, I'm going to take Kansas City. I think obviously Sean Payton is a great coach. I just think that, you know, Mahomes just has too much experience compared to Bo Nix.
Yeah, and you talk about the game last week with the Chiefs and the Buccaneers. I mean, obviously, Bucks are without Mike Evans, the number one receiver, and Chris Godwin, the number two receiver. But the fact that they still even had it go to overtime is a shock in itself. I mean, I don't think the Chiefs are performing as well as teams as people have hoped for. And the fact that they're still undefeated and, still on track to have a three-peat season in the Super Bowl. I mean, it's crazy to think about, but I don't think this team has faced, that big of a challenge. I mean, obviously week 1 you beat the Ravens, but I don't think the Ravens really had the chemistry that they do now. I mean, Derrick Henry looked like, he wasn't himself. He didn't rush for very many yards. The offensive line was getting killed, and Lamar Jackson was basically having to run around to save his life. Mark Andrews obviously wasn't getting anything going. Zay Flowers wasn't getting anything going. Their number one receiver was Zay Flowers. And, you know, just looking at the Chiefs like schedule, they have perhaps one of the easiest schedules from start to finish in the NFL. And for them to keep it close every single week against these teams that shouldn't have a chance to even keep it close, I mean, they're going to end up losing a game eventually. And, with the Broncos defense playing as well as it is, I wouldn't be shocked if, they had a chance to upset the Chiefs this week at home. I mean, you look at the record. I mean, like I said, they beat the Ravens by 7, which honestly could have been a tie game had Isaiah Likely stayed in bounds. They beat the Bengals by 1 point. They beat the Falcons by 5, which, again, there was a missed pass interference call. They beat the Chargers by 7. They beat the Saints by 13. They beat the Niners by 10. They beat the Raiders by 7, and then you go on and beat the Buccaneers by 6. I mean, all those games are one possession games except for, the Chiefs and the 49ers. But all those teams that I just mentioned are not that great. Saints are one of the worst teams. Ravens are one of the worst teams. 49ers have been playing, not so great with all the injuries they've had. The Saints, like I said, Chargers, they're hit and miss. Falcons are definitely one of the better teams, but they didn't have all the injuries that they needed to. Bengals are one of the worst team, one possession game there, and then you have the Buccaneers without the offensive power that they had to start the season. So, I mean, it's entirely possible for uh, Bo Nix to go out there and beat the Chiefs, and I wouldn't be shocked if Bo Nix actually did upset the Chiefs this week. I mean, there is the history with, the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes always beating the Broncos. I mean, their first win came from last year to end the season, but maybe it's a change of scenery. Maybe, Bo Nix is something that this team hasn't faced where, a scrambling quarterback where he can still, find players. But I think it's going to come down to how either offense plays because both defenses are very, very good. It's just a matter of who's gonna get hot at the right time? And obviously, the Chiefs have DeAndre Hopkins from a trade last week, and he definitely has found his position on the team. Obviously, he had 2 touchdowns last week, helped the Chiefs beat the Broncos or Buccaneers last week. You still have Travis Kelce, you still have Kareem Hunt, and Patrick Mahomes obviously has been getting it done with how he's been performing. I mean, obviously not the greatest, but still getting it done. Broncos have Bo Nix, they have Javonte Williams, they have Courtland Sutton. I mean, it's like I said, it's really going to be what offense gets hot at the right time. And, it's going to be a tough matchup between D Hop and Patrick Surtain. So I do think the Chiefs are going to win. But like I said, I wouldn't be shocked if the Broncos pulled an upset.
Yeah, for sure. And then moving on, the Atlanta Falcons going to be taking on the New Orleans Saints. Obviously, this one I'm going to roll with the Falcons. The Saints just have not had that great of a season. And, the Falcons, they're a good team. They have Darnell Mooney, and, they have Ray McLeod, who, hasn't been doing that great, but he's been getting some targets. And then, obviously they have Drake London, who was, injured. But, they're a good team. And, they're led by Kirk Cousins, who is very optimistic and very motivated to win and to prove himself. A lot of teams counted him out in the past, and he has just been leading the Falcons to success this season. Right now, they are 6-3. The Saints are 2-7, and I'm obviously taking the Falcons.
I'm going to take the Falcons too. I mean, we just talked about the Saints earlier. They're 0-7 the last 7 games. Falcons are legit playoff contenders with how they've been playing. There is question with Drake London. Obviously, he went down with an injury last week. There might be discussion on whether he plays or not, which, could be huge depending on whether or not, the offense plays well. Because a lot of the time, Drake London is Kirk Cousins, number one target aside, Darnell Mooney and Kyle Pitts. But, with Kyle Pitts not performing very well against the Cowboys, I think, it's very up in the air with who could take over for that role. But, he is day to day, but there is a chance he will play against the Saints team. But like I said, I just don't think the Saints, have the capability of keeping up with teams with such a high-powered offense. So I'm gonna stick with the Falcons. Derek Carr hasn't been getting it done. Obviously, they just fired the new head coach, so now they have a new head coach taking over. New playbook, whatever the case may be. Um, Getting new offensive players involved, but yeah, I mean, it's just a disaster right now for the Saints. So I'm gonna have the Falcons go, and especially they just had a big trade come out later or earlier this week. I don't know if you want to cover it, Alex. I mean, I can take it away if you want.
No, you could go ahead and talk about it.
Yeah, so with the NFL trade line happening Tuesday, there's a lot of trades that went down, like I mentioned. And one of the big trades was the Commanders had traded for the Saints cornerback Marshawn Lattimore. The Commanders traded away their 2025 picks and a third, fourth, and also gave him a 6th round pick for Marshawn Lattimore, and the Washington Commanders also received a 5th round pick for this year. The Commanders, with how stacked the offense is and all the capabilities they have there, I think they wanted to excel in their pass game because right now the Commanders rank 21st in yards per passing attempt, but 5th in passing yards per game. So it'll give them a definite improve defensively passing wise with a veteran corner like Marshawn Lattimore. The Commanders still have 7 picks for their 2025 draft pick or their draft. And, Lattimore's made the Pro Bowl 4 times between 2017 2021. But, he's missed 19 games over the last 2 games. So there is some injury concern, especially with his hamstring. But, the Commanders with the cap space that they have, I mean, it is a good trade for them. So with that, I mean, their defense definitely takes a shot there. So with Marshawn Lattimore not playing, I mean, it's kind of just a rebuild for the Saints. So that's another reason why I have the Falcons going into this game.
Yeah, for sure. And then moving on, the San Francisco 49ers taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in Tampa Bay. Obviously Tampa Bay put up a good fight against Kansas City, but Christian McCaffrey might be making his way back onto the team this weekend. And, it's hard to go against, the 49ers when Christian McCaffrey is in their backfield. He just tore up the field last season. And, he's been missing quite a lot of time this season. He hasn't played for 9 games after he was placed on the IR for bilateral Achilles tendonitis. And, there was question up in the air as to whether he would play this season with his injury. But with the 49ers sitting tied for second in the NFC West, obviously they're trying to get him back. So, I'm going to roll with the 49ers. I think that, this game is important for them to win. And then obviously Tampa Bay is facing some injuries. So, the 49ers are just going to need to navigate their way into the end zone if they want to win this game and, try and get into first place for the NFC West. It's going to be an interesting one because, obviously the 49ers, they've only won 4 games this season and they've lost a lot of games in their conference. So, this is pretty much a must win for them. And, they need to get back on track if they want to make a run like they did last season.
I think this game in particular is a must win for either team. I mean, like you said, the Buccaneers are 4-5, the 49ers are 4-4. Both team are in second place right now in their division. And for the NFL season being halfway done, I think, these games are where, teams are going to be making the playoffs or missing the playoffs just on losses like this. And, with Christian McCaffrey coming back, like you mentioned, I think changes the entire 49ers offense. I mean, granted, McCaffrey's not going to get a huge workload because of his bilateral Achilles tendonitis, but he still should have an impact on passing downs. He should have an impact at the red zone, you know, wherever he's needed, he'll go out there and make plays. I mean, we saw how he played last year, obviously offensive player of the year last year. Um, he was playing out of his mind. I mean, he had a touchdown almost every single game. He was making plays left and right. Screenplays were working out. He was, playing slot receiver, making plays there. And with Christian McCaffrey coming back, I think, this offense really does change. And, obviously with the Buccaneers being without Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, I think, the offense is very limited. You have Cade Otton going against Fred Warner, who's one of the best linebackers in the NFL right now. That's not a very favorable matchup for the Buccaneers. And, you look at the team and the teams that they faced recently. I mean, they put up a good fight, but I just don't think, the Buccaneers have it against this 49ers team with Christian McCaffrey coming back with the defense and how it's been playing and, just seeing how everything's been going. But I'm going to stick with the 49ers this game. I hope, for the Buccaneers' sakes, it is a good game, but I could see it being a blowout just because, like I said, Christian McCaffrey does change the impact of this 49ers offense. And we've seen it time and time again. I mean, obviously, Jordan Mason hasn't been playing terrible, but he hasn't been playing, as well as he had to start the season. But, with their running back core, George Kittle, Deebo Samuel, with the rookie of Ricky Pearsall, um, Juwan Jennings coming back. I mean, the 49ers offense definitely has a lot going for them the second half of the season. I wouldn't be surprised if, the 49ers made a push to reclaim the NFC West division with, their division with their schedule coming up. So I have the Niners winning this game against the Buccaneers.
Yeah, and then the Pittsburgh Steelers going to be taking on the Washington Commanders. Obviously the Commanders have just been playing super well this season with Jaden Daniels. And then they also have Terry McLaurin, Brian Robinson Jr. But Brian Robinson Jr. didn't play last week. He was suffering an injury. But I think he should be back this weekend. I haven't heard any reports on it, but it's going to be interesting. Obviously the Commanders are just really good. They're 7-2. The Steelers 6-2, which is really interesting because heading into the season, a lot of people doubted the Steelers with their quarterback situation with Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. But obviously Russell Wilson came in and, he has been putting up some numbers. But, I'm still going to roll with the Commanders. But at the same time, I think that the Commanders may face some trouble with TJ Watt and the Steelers defense.
I'm actually going to go with the Steelers this game. And the reason why is what you just said. This is the hardest defense that they have faced so far. And, we've seen them face, the Ravens, we've seen them face, the Cardinals, we've seen them face the Giants, the Panthers, the Browns, the Bengals, Buccaneers. I mean, this team is facing an actual defense. And, we go back to week one, obviously Commanders lose to the Buccaneers and their defense is kind of just, completely destroyed with Godwin and Evans going off on them. But to go 7-1 your last 8 games, I mean, that's pretty impressive. And for the one loss to be against, the Ravens by a 7-point game, that's pretty impressive in itself. But you look at the team, the Ravens didn't really have a great defense. I mean, passing wise, they're not the greatest. Rushing wise, I would say they're better. But you look at the Steelers defense, I mean, TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith, Cameron Hayward, Patrick Queens, Joey Porter Jr. I mean, Minka Fitzpatrick. All these players for the Steelers team definitely make it a scary defense, and especially for a rookie quarterback like Jaden Daniels. Obviously, he's been playing at an MVP caliber, but for him to be put up against a defense like the Steelers with Mike Tomlin, who knows how quarterbacks play at a rookie level, he's going to be in for a crazy day. And, there's going to be a lot of, QB contains watching for Jane Daniels if he takes off. But I have the Steelers winning this game. Obviously, with the addition of Marshawn Lattimore, I mean, the Commanders' off defense definitely, is improved. Like we mentioned with the trade deadline, the Steelers actually made 2 trades to improve their team. One of them being that the Steelers traded for Mike Williams from the Jets for a 5th round pick. And, I think that'll be a great improvement for the Steelers offense with, George Pickens and Mike Williams, who, will be a veteran present and will probably play majority of the snaps for the Steelers. But they also added Preston Smith, who came from a 7th round selection for the 2025 pick. And it came out that, Preston Smith had requested a trade. It just didn't go public. But with the injuries of TJ Watt and, Alex Highsmith, I think this pickup in particular is a really good pickup for the Steelers. Because, Preston Smith still has some production. He's still been playing great. But obviously, the Steelers trade away Deontay Johnson to the Panthers. So with them getting George Pickens and Mike Williams, I mean, it's great to have, and especially, with Mike Williams' height, it's definitely, an improvement to have on a team. But, Williams didn't really have not productive of a season with the Jets. So I think the trade with the draft value that they got was definitely worth it. Obviously it's going to be, a rental season, but with the wide receiver with that kind of experience, I mean, that's a really good trade to have. And for them to have him on the team for what the cost was, I mean, it's going to be a game changer for the Steelers defense. And not only do you have to focus on George Pickens, but now you have to focus on Mike Williams, where, the Commanders defense, with Marshawn Lattimore, you could just put him up against George Pickens and the rest of the defense will be fine. Where now you have to focus on both of them. So, Russ, defense for the Steelers, I have the Steelers winning this game against the Commanders.
Yeah, and then moving on, the Tennessee Titans going to be taking on the Los Angeles Chargers. And this one will be an interesting one because, both teams have not been that great this season. The Chargers have won 5 games, but, the Titans obviously on the lower end. 2-6 is their record. This one's going to be interesting. Obviously, the Titans, things have not been going their way at all this season. They just traded away DeAndre Hopkins to the Kansas City Chiefs. And, now, they're stuck with some mediocre players. And then when you look at the Chargers, same thing. They are doing decent, but they still don't have a top tier team. But I'm still going to roll with the Chargers. It's hard to go against Justin Herbert. I know he started the season out not so great, but seems like he's gotten better and he's able to lead his team through the season.
Yeah, I'm also gonna roll with the Jets or the Chargers on this play. Offensive line has just been impressive. defensive line, it could be better, but it has been holding up. Uh, with how they've been playing, I mean, their defense has been holding teams to at least 14 points a game, and that's NFL best in the season so far. I mean, to hold your teams to an average of 14 points, that's impressive in itself for the defense that you have. Obviously, the Titans' offense just doesn't really have much going for them. Number one receiver with it being, Calvin Ridley. Number one running back being Tony Pollard with Tyjae Spears. Maybe Levis comes back. Maybe Mason Rudolph starts this game, but either way, it's a tough matchup for the Titans to go against this Chargers team. And with how the team's been performing, running the ball, passing the ball with the receivers that they have, defensively with how they've been able to stop pretty much anything run pass wise. I think, this Chargers team should be able to blow out this Titans defense or this Titans team. I could honestly see them holding them scoreless, just with how the or the Chargers defense have been performing. But yeah, I mean, it's just not a favorable matchup for the Titans. So I have the Chargers winning this game.
Yeah, and then moving on, the New York Jets will be taking on the Arizona Cardinals in Arizona. This one's going to be interesting. Um, Obviously, the Jets have just not been having a great season. They're 3-6. The Cardinals 5-4, and obviously, the Jets won their last game. Um, but it was a close one when they faced off against the Texans. Except that game was pretty much a must win for the Jets since they have such a low record. But I mean, I guess the biggest takeaway would be, that Aaron Rodgers is now connecting with his receivers, and possibly there is an uprise in team chemistry that we have not seen all season. So, I mean, I guess on the Arizona side, it could be a little bit concerning, but I'm still gonna take Arizona. I think that Kyler Murray is just finding his way around the defensive players of any team, and also just finding a way to connect with his receivers, especially Trey McBride. And then obviously, James Conner has been solid this season. And, he doesn't get enough credit. Nobody really talks about him that much, but he really does deserve to be recognized. He's been putting up some numbers, and, for that reason, I am taking the Cardinals. But I wouldn't be surprised if the Jets, kind of kept this one close.
I'm also going to take the Cardinals, but I do think it'll be a close matchup, like you said. I mean, with, like James Conner, who's been a very productive running back. You have Marvin Harrison, when given the opportunity, can, produce. Trey McBride has himself in this offensive role. I mean, we saw him score a rushing touchdown last week, have 124 yards 2 weeks ago. He definitely, is one of the main roles of this offense with James Conner, which is actually funny because McBride has a fumble recovery touchdown and a rushing touchdown, but no receiving touchdown on the season. But, looking at this team, I mean, the Jets is definitely not a team to be taken lightly. I mean, they've had a few upsets in the season, and we've seen that, with especially like the Patriots game. But it is still gonna be a close matchup. I mean, Aaron Rodgers is a Hall of Fame quarterback, and, that like, while he hasn't been performing great this season, I mean, he still is producing, good numbers. And, Devontae Adams and Garrett Wilson, I mean, obviously, those are 2 really good wide receivers that, the Cardinals defense have to look after for with, Max Melton and Sean Murphy-Bunting if he plays, Starling Thomas, Garrett Williams, Buda Baker, Jalen Thompson. I mean, they're all going to have to focus a lot on those 2 receivers. Brees Hall and Braylon Allen, they are 2 very dominant duo running backs that if they get the run game going, they're virtually an unstoppable duo running the ball. And, with the Cardinals being one of the worst running defenders in the NFL, I mean, I could see that happening. I mentioned this a couple weeks ago. I mean, the Cardinals, they focus on one thing and they try to stick with it the entire way. With this team, you can't really do that because you stick with the pass, they're going to run down your throat. You stick with the run, they're going to pass way over your head for touchdowns and stuff like that. But you know, the Jets really haven't been getting it clicking. I mean, obviously they won last week against the Texans, who were facing a ton of injuries, but with the Cardinals, I mean, the NFL trade deadline, one of the big picks they needed was edge rusher. They go out and trade a 6th round pick for linebacker Baron Browning. That'll give them a huge boost in pass rushing, whatever the case may be. But like I said, it's going to be a close matchup. Um, I wouldn't be shocked if Chad Ryland went out to make a game winning field goal, but it's going to be one of those games where it's going to come down to whoever has the ball. I think it's going to be a shootout, with both the teams performing the way that they have so far. I mean, the Cardinals went out and beat the Bears 29-9. Last week, they went out and, kept up with the Dolphins with, you know, Tua coming back and Tyreek Hill and all of them. So definitely, some high powered offense going into this game with, not so great defenses, but I do have the Cardinals by a slight margin.
Yeah, and then moving on, the Philadelphia Eagles going to be taking on the Dallas Cowboys. This one will be interesting. I do think that the Eagles are going to win. Obviously they have AJ Brown, Devonta Smith, and then they have, Saquon Barkley. And, it's hard to go against Jalen Hurts. He's able to find a way to make a play, and then their defense is pretty good as well. And then when you look at the Cowboys, nothing is going right. I actually saw a video of Dak Prescott telling one of his teammates, I think it was actually the backup quarterback, he was saying, our team sucks. This team sucks. So, obviously, the leadership is not there in Dallas. And you just hate to see that if you're a Dallas fan. You hate to see it if you are on the staff of the Cowboys, because of the huge contract that he got. And obviously, things are just not working out there in Dallas with Dak Prescott. And then when you look at the rest of the team, with CeeDee Lamb and, it's just things aren't working out for Dallas. So, for that reason, I'm going to go with the Philadelphia Eagles. I think they're a much better team. I think their coaching is better. I think that, their defense is obviously better. And, Dallas is pretty much, in my opinion, I think they could be possibly maybe the worst team, if not the second to worst team. But, I do think that they are a good team. Things just aren't working out right now, and something is just not right over there in Dallas.
Yeah, I'm also going with the Eagles. Obviously, one of the big issues with the Cowboys is Dak Prescott is not playing. We saw him go down with a hamstring injury last week, and it's expected to sideline him multiple weeks. We also saw Brandon Cooks, or not Brandon Cooks. We also saw CeeDee Lamb go out with a shoulder injury, and he's questionable to play this week. I mean, AC sprain. It's there's optimism that he will play, but it wouldn't be shocking if he didn't. Obviously, the Marcus Lawrence still on IR. Micah Parsons is expected to, make a comeback this week against the Eagles, but with what offense does the Cowboys have? I mean, Eagles have, Saquon Barkley, Devontae Smith, AJ Brown, who avoided a serious knee injury this season last game. And obviously we saw Saquon Barkley last week with the reverse hurdle that I think broke the internet. But you're at the point right now for the Cowboys where you really don't have anything else going for you. I mean, you have Cooper Rush and Trey Lance, who might be your starting quarterback. And depending on whatever one, Mike McCarthy wants to give, depending on how he wants to see Trey Lance do, how he wants to see, Cooper Rush do if they want to continue winning games. I mean, it's definitely up in the air. Obviously, CeeDee Lamb, he's questionable to play. If he isn't able to play, I mean, Ferguson's going to be the top receiver on the Cowboys team, which is not great to have. Obviously, Dowdle is the team starting running back, which is also not a great uh, starting running back to have. Jalen Tolbert has been playing decent. Obviously, not wide receiver too decent, but he's been playing decent. I just have the Eagles winning. I mean, with their defense, with their offense, I don't think the Cowboys are going to keep up with how they handle the game. So I have the Eagles this game.
Yeah, and then moving on, the Detroit Lions taking on the Houston Texans. Obviously, Nico Collins still out. And then, when you look at the Lions, they got David Montgomery, Amon-Ra St. Brown, um, Sam Laporta. Obviously, they are without Aiden Hutchinson on the defensive side, but they've been able to continue on, make some plays. They've only lost one game. They look amazing. I said it at the beginning of the season. I would not be surprised if they went to the Super Bowl. I know it's still early, but I think this could really be a contender in the Super Bowl. And I actually said, and we could go back and rerun this, but I said, I wouldn't be surprised if it's the Lions against the Texans. And, obviously the Texans have, kind of slowed down. So not too sure about the Texans anymore, but, I think this game will be a fun one to watch. I'm happy that it's a night game on Sunday. And, it's going to be fun. But I got to take the Lions on this one. I think, this is going to be hard for the Texans to lose two in a row, but the Lions I think are the better team. So this one will be an interesting one.
I also have the Lions. I know you said earlier, actually when we first started this podcast, that you did have the Lions going to the Super Bowl. I think right now they're actually Super Bowl favorites to win this year's Super Bowl, which is shocking. I mean, you lose your biggest defensive player, who undoubtedly would have won Defensive Player of the Year had he stayed healthy, with Aiden Hutchinson. But the Lions did find a replacement. They did trade a fifth rounder this year and a future sixth rounder for Zadarius Smith from the Browns, and a sixth rounder there, or a seventh rounder there. So, it helps bolster their defensive line, their pass rush, their run defense, whatever the case may be. Where the Texans, on the other hand, Stephon Diggs is out for the season, like we mentioned earlier. Nico Collins isn't going to be activated this game from IR. Still questions with his hamstring. But Jared Goff has been playing great, and I think with the help of Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery, with Amon-Ra St. Brown and uh, Jameson Williams, when he does come back from suspension, I mean, that's a team that you want to have to help your quarterback. A great duo running back, great pass catchers. I mean, Sam Laporta has been doing his thing. I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if, this team did go to the Super Bowl and win. Texans, on the other hand, I mean, with all the injuries they've had, they've definitely slowed down, like you said. I think when Nico Collins does come back, if he comes back soon, will help the Texans offense, accelerate again. But for right now, the Lions are probably going to win this game. One of the better defenses in the NFL, one of the best offenses in the NFL, and they don't have any signs of slowing down anytime soon. So I have the Lions winning this game against the Texans on Sunday Night Football.
Yeah, and then moving on, Monday night, going to be an interesting one. Two teams that have picked things up. The Miami Dolphins going to be taking on the Los Angeles Rams. Obviously, the Dolphins led by Tua Tagovailoa again, with Devon Achane in the backfield, and then they have Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle. A great team. And then when you look at the Rams, obviously with Matthew Stafford, Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp. Except you mentioned earlier there was an incident in the last game with Puka Nacua. So that was interesting, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the future. But I'm gonna pick for this game. I'm gonna have to go with the Dolphins. I would not be surprised if the Rams won. But, I think that the Dolphins are the better team. I think that Tua will get back into his rhythm, and I think that the Dolphins will come away with the win. And this
It's interesting. Oh, sorry.
and this is also a crucial game for the Dolphins to win.
And it's interesting that you say that you have the Dolphins winning, because I have the Dolphins winning too. And it's not a favorable pickup, but I think Tua has adapted to playing in the NFL. I mean, we saw last week against the Buffalo Bills. Tua had 231 yards, two touchdowns, no interceptions. Obviously, his touchdown went to Devon Achane and Jalen Waddle. But you know he does show improvements there. The Rams right now actually, are one of the worst pass defending teams in the NFL. And with Tua, coming back on track to, look for Tyreek Hill, Jaylen Waddle, Jonnu Smith, Devon Achane, Raheem Mostert. I mean, that's a quick, speedy team offensively that can run down the field, make some big plays. I think, if Tua can look more for Tyreek Hill and Jaylen Waddle and stuff like that against the secondary, I wouldn't be shocked if the Dolphins did win. The only issue I have is Kerwin Williams, you have Puka Nacua, and Cooper Kupp back. And with those three players, I mean, those players can redefine a team. Kerwin Williams right now, 8 touchdowns on the season for 602 yards. Obviously, Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp are back after, being out multiple weeks. But yeah, I mean, both these teams have just shown that this is an important game. Obviously, the Dolphins, this is a game that they need to win to even have a chance to make the playoffs, or at least help their chances make the playoffs with whatever chance they have left. The Rams, I mean, they're fighting for the number one spot in the NFC West that's up for grabs for practically anyone in that division. So it's going to be a close game. I mean, Rams defensive line has been playing great. Obviously, Jared Verse is playing great for a rookie defensive player. Right now, currently in the league for defensive player of the year with 3.5 sacks. Obviously Kobe Turner with 4.5 sacks. Brandon Fisk with 3. Byron Young with 4. I mean, this team has been playing great defensively. It's just when given time for players to throw the ball, that's where the struggle begins with the secondary. So I have the Dolphins winning by a very, very close margin, but I think they'll get it done this week. So I have the Dolphins against the Rams.
Yeah, and obviously this week there was a lot of trades taking place. I'll let you talk about that and then we can move on to NBA.
Yeah, so like we mentioned, there are some big trades that happen. Obviously the big ones were, Marshawn Lattimore and, Mike Williams, who, was projected to get traded, um, and just stuff like that. But there were some smaller trades that went down in the NFL. Obviously Khalil Herbert was one of the smaller trades that went down. The Cowboys actually traded a fourth round pick for Jonathan Mingus and a 2025 fourth round pick. I don't necessarily agree with that pick. I think they kind of overpaid for Jonathan Mingus. It's definitely, not anything great, especially with how he's been playing in Carolina. I mean, just nothing's been clicking for them. And then the Ravens traded a seventh round pick for Tre'Davious White and a future seventh round pick. So I think, with the Ravens, it'll help at least somewhat control their passing situations. But, Trayvon White was practically benched inactive with the Rams with how he's been playing with them. So that's what prompted them to trade for the Ravens. So, Trayvon White gets a new start with the Ravens. Defense, obviously a little bit of a better defense, but still nonetheless, I mean, it is, hard to keep up with those receivers. But now with all that being covered, we have some big news coming out from the NBA with Joel Embiid, and I'll let you take it away, Alex.
Yeah, so obviously Joel Embiid was suspended for 3 games without pay after shoving Marcus Hayes, a Philadelphia columnist. This came after the Philadelphia 76ers lost to the Memphis Grizzlies on Saturday. Embiid will now be suspended during Wednesday's game against the LA Clippers, Friday versus the Los Angeles Lakers, and on Sunday versus the Charlotte Hornets. And, the shove came after the columnist asked a question about his son and late brother. And Embiid responded by saying, "The next time you bring up my dead brother and my son again, you are going to see what I'm going to do to you. And I'm going to have to live with the consequences." So, a very serious, response by Embiid. And he will be facing consequences, which will be the 3 game suspension without pay. And, he will lose over $1 million due to the suspension.
Yeah, and it's interesting, with Joel Embiid, he actually has not even played a game this season. And it shows when you look at the Clippers, when you look at the 76ers record, they're 1-5 right now. And keep in mind, Joel Embiid, a former MVP of the NBA, And with how the team's been performing so far, I mean, they need Joel Embiid. And, if they face any more losses, I mean, you're putting yourself into a future of those games could determine if you make the playoffs or not, especially with the division that you're in. Everyone's been playing super great so far. I mean, the Suns, Oakland, Cleveland, Boston, Brooklyn, the Nets. I mean, they've all been playing, great, but there is some, conflict with what's been going on. Obviously, talking about like family, I mean, that's you shouldn't go to that point to talking about family, especially in an article like that. But, you have to control your actions, you have to control your emotions and stuff like that. And of course, with the actions that Embiid did do, I mean, it cost your team 3 games. So now they have to rebound, change their, direction of how the team's going to face with the upcoming games. And the upcoming games are not very easy games. I mean, obviously you have the Clippers, you have the Lakers, you have the Hornets, and all those teams have been playing, pretty well. I mean, the Hornets, they're 2-5. Lakers are currently sitting at a 4-3 record, and then the Clippers right now, I mean, they're sitting at a 3-4 record. So they're not tough schedules, but they're not easy. And to go out and lose those games, especially, I mean, that could really cost your team whatever chance at a playoff you have in the future.
Yeah, for sure. As a player on a team, you can never take anything for granted because you never know when you'll need it. And I say this a lot, but the team that is successful will always be the one with the least amount of mistakes. And, if you can avoid something, just avoid it. I know, obviously, talking about somebody's family is going way too far. I think a lot of times people forget that athletes are humans and they have emotions, they have feelings, and you have to treat people the way you want to be treated, and you wouldn't like it if somebody asked you that type of question, and kind of wanted to, obviously the columnist was asking him the question to put the answer on display, and you just have to think about what you're um, gonna be asking people and think about how you're treating people. So, it could have been avoided, um, but it is definitely a sad situation. Moving on to the Major League Baseball, obviously the Dodgers just became World Series champions. They, took place in their parade, and it was kind of funny because on social media I saw a post that somebody was like saying, "Well, even the Dodgers have to deal with California traffic because the team was actually stuck on their bus in the California traffic, trying to make their way to the parade area." So, obviously, I'm sure that parade was a lot of fun to, be in or be at or whatever. But, something that isn't so fun is getting surgery. And that is what Shohei Ohtani will have to undergo pretty soon. He's going to have to get labrum surgery. So, that is going to be a huge setback for him. But at the same time, he will not miss any spring training practice, and he should be ready by the time spring training comes around. Ohtani suffered the injury in the third game, and obviously, he only hit the ball one time out of 11 plate appearances, um, and in 2020, Cody Bellinger suffered a similar injury while celebrating with Enrique Hernandez, um, and underwent labrum surgery as well. So, this one, not a good thing for Ohtani, but I'm glad to hear that he will, have a fast recovery.
Yeah, and with him winning the World Series, I mean, it's a huge thing for Ohtani, who's, one of the best MLB players in history, obviously, created the 50-50 club. I think with his injury that he, sustained with the Dodgers, being as good as they are, I think, him not having to rely so much on his shoulder is definitely, something good. I mean, obviously, the Dodgers are hoping that he can pitch for next season. I mean, that's why he didn't pitch at all this season, was just assigned as the designated hitter role. But, he did have that elbow surgery last year, with the AC, not the AC, the UC tear that he had in his elbow 2 years ago. So for him to come back, in spring training, especially to be ready in spring training, I mean, that's huge news for the Dodgers. For him to, have a chance to go back to pitching again next season, for him to, be able to do all the things that he's been able to do history wise, be able to, play MVP level, especially, hitting, and now you add on the pitching again. I mean, it's good looking for the Dodgers and for, the torn labrum. I mean, it's unfortunate he suffered it during the World Series trying to steal a base in second base, but thankfully it's nothing too serious where it's going to keep him out a long period of time, wherever the case may be, where, it's just going to be a simple, surgery and whatever the case may be, but, nothing disastrous for the Dodgers. And, hopefully like, everything turns out the way it does. Hopefully surgery goes well for Otani. I mean, you definitely need, especially with the huge season you have going into next season after winning the World Series.
Yeah, for sure. So with that, that is our week 10 episode of Talking X's and O's with Alex and Tyler. We hope you guys had a great time listening to us, and be sure to stay tuned in. You guys can hear our next week's picks along with other sports information that has been going on. But we appreciate you guys listening, and we hope to have you guys again next week.